Hello viewers, you're welcome. I'm Dr. Gijo Harry, and I'm here to have a lecture with you on the effects of waves and currents on substratum, dissolved oxygen, carbon dioxide, and inorganic ions in fresh water. So in other words, we want to look at how waves and currents affect the distribution of the substratum, the dissolved oxygen, carbon dioxide, and inorganic nutrients in aquatic ecosystems. Now, waves and currents significantly influence the physical and chemical properties of freshwater ecosystems. They alter the substratum distribution of dissolved gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, as well as inorganic ions. So we want to look at how they affect the distribution of these. Now, the nature of the effects depend on the type of freshwater body, whether it's a river or it's a large lake, and the intensity of the water movement. Now, let us look at how waves and the water current affects the substratum. Basically, substratum means the bottom of the lake or river or any other solid structure that supports life or that's at the bottom of the river or lake. How does waves and currents affect the substratum? Waves and currents shape the physical structure of the river bed or lake bed known as the substratum by resuspending, transporting, and depositing sediments. Basically, that's how the currents affect these substratum, and want to look at each of the processes involved. The first process is erosion and resuspension. Fast-moving currents in rivers and strong waves in large lakes increase bed shear stress, which picks up the sediments at the bottom of the lake and suspends them. And this can also expose larger particles and bedrock, affecting habitats for bottom-dwelling organisms. Basically, when the waves and the current washes off the surface of the substratum, it actually exposes the bedrock and also destabilizes the bottom-dwelling organisms. The second process, in the second way, waves and action, waves and currents affect the substratum in a lake or any other freshwater body is sediment transport. Currents and waves transport suspended sediments downstream in a river and basically domicile them, especially in slow-moving areas of the river or the lake. In estuaries, the interaction between waves and currents can create complex sediment transport patterns, influencing the formation of erosion of deltas and shears. So basically, the current and waves help to transport these particles from one point to another. Then the next thing we want to look at basically is deposition. The next way it affects sediments. The next way waves and currents affect sediments is deposition, especially in areas where water is very slow. These sediments that are transported are now deposited. The deposition of fine soft sediments can bury existing habitats and alter the composition of the substratum. So that's basically the ways it affects the substratum. So we have looked at basically three ways in which waves and current affect the substratum. The first is erosion and resuspension. The second is sediment transport. And the third is deposition. We want to look at the next, which is how waves and currents affect dissolved oxygen. The surface of the water tend to have a lot of dissolved oxygen because of primary production. So water movement is a primary driver of dissolved oxygen dynamics in freshwater systems, basically because when the water moves, the turbulence causes a mix between the water and the atmosphere, whereby allowing oxygen to be dissolved in these freshwater bodies, even in the ocean. Now, how does waves and currents affect the amount of dissolved oxygen in our freshwater bodies or even in the ocean? The first way it affects is aeration and mixing. Waves and currents increase the surface area of water exposed to the atmosphere and cause turbulence, which enhances the diffusion of oxygen into the water. Fast currents and stronger waves lead to more vigorous mixing, whereby causing the water to have higher concentrations of oxygen. Then the second way it affects the amount of oxygen is impact on stratification. Basically, the waves in lakes, basically the lakes are stratified into the epilimion at the surface, the metalimnion at the middle, and the more dense and cooler layer, the hypolimnion at the bottom. But when strong waves and currents hit, the strong winds and current affect the river or lake. It breaks down the stratification, which results in the mixing of the nutrient-rich bottom layer, the oxygen-rich surface layer with the oxygen-poor bottom layer, which causes a redistribution of the oxygen, a mixing whereby oxygen is now made available to the bottom layer. The second effect is oxygen depletion. Now, the currents and waves affect they result in oxygen depletion. In still slow-moving water, especially during warmer periods, the decomposition of organic matter actually results in the depletion of nutrients at the bottom of the lake. Now, how does current affect this? The current help to prevent this by mixing oxygenated surface water downwards. So when the current flows, it causes some kind of rotation or movement that helps to mix the surface, the oxygen at the surface to the bottom. So basically, the waves and currents help in redistribution of oxygen to lower regions of the lakes. Now let us see how waves and currents affect carbon dioxide. Waves and current, how do they affect carbon dioxide? Like dissolved oxygen, the concentration of carbon dioxide in freshwater is directly influenced by atmospheric exchange and internal biological processes such as photosynthesis, and these are regulated by waves and currents. Now let us look at atmospheric exchange. Waves and turbulence increase the rate at which carbon dioxide is exchanged between the water surface and the atmosphere. This helps to regulate the water's pH and carbonate system, basically. And the second is mixing and respiration. Now, the waves and currents help to circulate carbon dioxide that is produced by respiration of aquatic organisms, especially through the animals, and the mixing actually occurs. Then as the current flows, they tend to cause some kind of current, kind of mixture of this carbon dioxide that is produced. A turnover event can release the accumulation of carbon dioxide to the surface and atmosphere. So basically, during turnover events, carbon dioxide is returned to the surface and the atmosphere. Now let us look at buffering capacity. The movement of water influences the availability of bicarbonates and carbonates, which act as a natural buffer against large shifts in pH caused by changes in carbon dioxide. We want to look at how waves and current affect inorganic ions. How does waves and current affect inorganic ions? Waves and currents impact the distribution and concentration of inorganic ions through several mechanisms. Now, these inorganic ions include nitrates, phosphates, sulfates, calcium, and many others. They affect the distribution of these inorganic ions. Now, let us look at the process, the steps. One of them is nutrient resuspension. In shallow nutrient-rich lakes, wind-driven waves can distribute substratum or suspended particles in the lake, making these sediments or nutrients such as phosphorus, nitrogen, and other nutrients that were initially in the hypolimnion to be redistributed to surface layers. This can fuel excessive algal bloom, because when the nutrients at the bottom are brought to the surface, the algae that require these nutrients to grow now begin to proliferate, and that's basically called eutrophication or algal bloom. The second effect of waves and currents on nutrients or inorganic ions is nutrient transport. Currents play a very crucial role in redistributing nutrients and other dissolved substances in the freshwater bodies. In larger water bodies, upwelling currents can bring nutrient-rich water from the deep lower region to the surface of the water. One other effect of currents and waves on the nutrients or inorganic ions is mixing and distribution. By breaking down thermal or density stratification, currents and waves ensure a more even distribution of inorganic ions through the water column. Without this mixing, nutrients can become trapped in the deeper water bodies, in the deeper parts of the water body. So the mixing actually helps to bring the nutrients to the surface that are now very useful to the photosynthetic organisms such as the algae and even plants such as water hyacinths and other organisms that depend on these nutrients. Thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate you for watching this video. Keep watching more of my videos from my YouTube and TikTok channels. Thanks.